Captain Elias Trent had always thought he understood the quiet of space. The hum of the engine, the occasional chirp from the ship's navigation AI, the endless stretch of stars like a black velvet ceiling sprinkled with glittering dust, it was supposed to be predictable. But predictability had abandoned him the moment the distress signal came through. It wasn't the usual automated call for fuel or repairs. This was alive, frantic, human in tone, yet tinged with something alien, something unfamiliar that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He had expected a calm patrol, a few routine diagnostics, and maybe an argument with a stubborn maintenance droid. He had not expected chaos wrapped in charm to greet him on the other end. The first glimpse of Liara made him question every assumption he had ever held about aliens. She looked human at first glance, slender, sharp features, a smirk that hinted at a humor even a black hole might envy, but the long ears perched atop her head betrayed her origin. They twitched like radar dishes whenever she was curious, annoyed, or amused, which was frequently. Her eyes were an odd shade of violet, not quite like anything in the human spectrum, and they sparkled as if she found the entire galaxy ridiculous, which, judging by the way she studied him, was probably accurate. She was standing on a cliff-edge platform overlooking the energy core of her city, her robes fluttering like banners caught in a storm. Elias, in his standard-issue uniform, felt immediately overdressed, underprepared, and entirely outclassed. "I take it you're not here to enjoy the view," she said, one eyebrow arched. Her long ears flicked, brushing against the windless air in a way that somehow seemed sarcastic. "Good, because if you're just sightseeing, you're going to need a helmet. These cliffs don't care if you're polite." Elias attempted a grin. "I thought I was expected." Which, in retrospect, was probably not the most confident opening line to a long-eared alien warrior. Name's Trent, Captain Human. Also, apparently easily distracted by scenic falls. He trailed off, realizing the cliff he almost leaned on was likely lethal if gravity decided to cooperate with physics. "Liara," she said. "And yes, the falls are spectacular, but we're not here to admire water. Not that I expect you to understand beauty without danger." Her tone was teasing, but the glint in her eyes was sharp, measuring. She had already calculated something about him and he didn't like it. Or maybe he did, he wasn't sure anymore. Before either could say more, the city's energy core pulsed violently. Lights flickered, alarms screamed like metallic banshees, and Elias instinctively ducked behind a railing, forgetting entirely that the railing itself might not survive a gravitational surge. Liara raised her hands, palms glowing faintly as ripples of energy radiated outward. The surge bent around her like water flowing over rocks, and Elias had the momentary, humiliating thought that she looked like she was petting the storm itself. "First lesson," she called, eyes gleaming. "Energy doesn't negotiate with humans, you either dance or get flattened." Elias swallowed. "Dance. Yes, dance or panic, but trust me, panic is messy and ungraceful." She shot him a grin that suggested she had just delivered a line worthy of intergalactic theater. Elias felt the absurdity of the situation. He was a trained captain, and he had just been lectured on dancing by a violetide alien with ears longer than his arms. He laughed, a short, nervous bark that echoed strangely in the platform's metal corridors. The next few hours were a blur of chaos, laughter, and awkward synchronization. Liara insisted on showing him how to manipulate energy fields to stabilize the city's failing shields, and Elias insisted on doing it the human way, which involved a lot more frantic button pushing and yelling at the AI. At one point, a stray pulse of power knocked him off his feet, and he landed flat on his back, staring at the ceiling with all the dignity of a fallen droid. Admiring the architecture. Liara teased, her ears flicking dangerously close to his face. Elias tried to scramble upright but ended up sliding a foot over a conduit. "I said duck, not worship the floor," she added. By the time the sun, or whatever passed for a sun in this sector, rose over the city, Elias realized that he wasn't just out of his depth, he was being outclassed in every conceivable way. Liara moved with precision, a mixture of elegance and controlled chaos that made him feel like he had just wandered into a dance he hadn't learned. And yet, every misstep, every clumsy attempt to understand her world was met with humor rather than scorn. She laughed at his mistakes, and each laugh carried a warmth that made him forget for a moment that the universe might end before breakfast. The real revelation came when Liara finally led him to the core of the crisis. A rippling anomaly that devoured matter like an overenthusiastic vacuum, stretching and twisting reality itself. It wasn't intelligent in any way he could comprehend, but it seemed aware of their presence, responding with pulses that shook the city like distant thunder. Elias had fought in wars, navigated hostile terrains, and stared down asteroid fields, but this was new. Liara didn't flinch. She raised her hands, muttering a string of words that sounded like poetry if poetry was written in pulses of pure light, and the anomaly recoiled slightly, as if surprised that someone dared defy it. "You see," she said, smirking, "it thinks you're interesting." Elias blinked, unsure if he should be insulted or honored. By the end of the day, they had established a tentative strategy. Elias would provide tactical support, improvisation, and human stubbornness, while Liara would manipulate the energy flows, negotiate with the city's defensive systems, and, judging by the way she smiled, keep him from dying in spectacularly silly ways. Their alliance was precarious, fueled by necessity, humor, and the odd thrill of seeing just how far they could push each other without the galaxy imploding. As they sat atop the platform, watching the strange alien twilight settle over the city, Elias finally asked the question he had been holding back. "So do you do this with every human that shows up uninvited?" Liara snorted. "Only the ones who survive my dancing lessons." Her ears twitched, catching the fading hum of the city's energy as if it were laughing along with her. Elias laughed too, a deep, weary sound, realizing that in a universe capable of annihilation at any moment, perhaps this laughter, missteps, and a long-eared alien who found him both infuriating and amusing was exactly the kind of weapon he needed. And so, amid pulses of energy, flashes of cosmic light, and the subtle absurdity of his situation, Captain Elias Trent and Liara, the violet-eyed, long-eared alien woman, began their slow, improbable journey toward saving the universe, one chaotic, humorous step at a time. The second day on Zyria began with Elias questioning every decision that had led him to sign up for interstellar duty. The first day had been a chaotic ballet of near-death experiences and energy pulses that made his hair stand on end. Had he mentioned the part where Liara laughed at every single one of his mistakes? He was starting to suspect that surviving her humor was going to be as difficult as surviving the anomaly itself. Still, he couldn't deny that something about her confidence was infectious. She had a way of moving through the city that made it seem alive, almost sentient, and the way her long ears flicked toward every new threat, every unstable energy conduit, every stray drone, made him realize that perhaps humans had simply evolved in the wrong environment. Liara appeared suddenly, emerging from a corridor like a shadow cast in violet light. "Move your boots, human," she said, voice dripping amusement. "We have practice." "Practice?" Elias asked, wary. "I barely survived yesterday's demonstration." "Exactly," she said, grinning. "You need more humiliation before you can understand elegance." Her ears twitched dramatically, emphasizing the insult in a way that made him want to punch then laugh, which he did reluctantly. They moved toward the training field outside the city, a wide expanse of floating platforms over a luminous plasma river that hissed and shimmered like liquid light. Elias wondered if falling in would be instantly fatal or just mildly embarrassing. Liara seemed to read his thoughts and snorted. "Yes, you would be mildly crispy. Welcome to advanced survival exercises." The training began with energy manipulation drills. Liara had a way of making arcs of plasma dance around her fingertips, bending them into shapes that defied physics and sometimes common sense. Elias tried to imitate her, waving his hands and shouting commands at the ship's AI to generate a protective field. The field flickered, sparked, and then exploded in a harmless but impressive plume of multicolored smoke. Liara clapped slowly. "Bravo, you've invented a new color." Elias coughed. "I call it panicked human red." They moved from one floating platform to another, leaping over gaps while Liara manipulated gravitational pulses to make the jumps easier, or in some cases, more unpredictable. She laughed at his flailing attempts, flicking his arm with a soft energy pulse that sent him spinning, only to catch him midair with a levitation field. "See," she said, "dance." Hours passed in a blur of energy sparks, floating jumps, and occasional near misses with the plasma river below. Elias discovered that his lungs weren't used to this kind of exercise, that his reflexes were slower than a human was supposed to admit, and that Liara's teasing laughter had a hypnotic effect that made even mistakes slightly charming. He admitted grudgingly that perhaps she was the best teacher he'd ever had, and terrifyingly efficient at making him feel like a rookie. By mid-afternoon, they had been called to a nearby system under threat by a swarm of plasma drones, small, aggressive, and inexplicably curious about human anatomy. Elias had expected a firefight. Liara had expected choreography. He was immediately instructed to mimic her movements, ducking, rolling, and occasionally flailing in ways that resembled interpretive dance more than combat. The drones, apparently unprepared for this display, hesitated, their sensors confused by the unpredictable combination of human panic and alien precision. Elias flopped onto the ground mid-roll, panting. "This is ridiculous," he wheezed. Liara extended a hand, energy crackling along her fingertips. "Ridiculous is a survival strategy, human, embrace it." She shot a pulse at a drone, sending it spinning into the air with a cartoonish yelp of sound. "Also, never underestimate the power of humiliation. Enemies hate being confused." After the swarm dispersed, Elias and Liara found themselves drifting through the system in her ship. She had modified it so that the interior contained anti-gravity zones for exercise purposes, though Elias suspected it was her way of keeping him slightly terrified at all times. "Why do I feel like every movement here could get me killed?" he asked, clinging to a console. Liara grinned. "Because every movement could get you killed, that's the fun part. Humans think danger is optional, it's not." Her long ears twitched as she activated a holographic display showing him a map of the anomaly's projected path. "This is our next challenge. It's moving faster than expected, so we'll need precision and improvisation." "You know, human-style thinking." Elias groaned. "You mean reckless improvisation." "Tomato, she replied, flicking a hand at him, producing a burst of holographic energy that nearly blinded him. He waved it off. "I think I'm going to need more than luck." "You have me," she said simply, her ears twitching in a way that made him think they were alive with amusement. "And if that fails, you have your clumsiness, which is surprisingly effective." She winked. The pair spent the remainder of the day jumping between systems, stabilizing planets destabilized by the anomaly, and performing maneuvers that required precise energy pulses and human stubbornness. They encountered planets with magnetic storms that sang like choirs, asteroid belts that drifted lazily while sending out gravitational hiccups, and rogue comets that seemed personally offended by their intrusion. Every encounter tested their teamwork, every misstep produced laughter, and every small victory gave them a fleeting sense of control in a universe otherwise determined to unravel. That night, while docked in a neutral station orbiting a crystalline star, Elias and Liara shared a rare quiet moment. He was still covered in soot, sweat, and minor burns. She looked unscathed, leaning casually against a railing, long ears twitching in the soft luminescence. "You know," he said, trying to sound casual, "I thought humans were adaptable, but I think I just met the standard." Liara laughed, a sound that echoed faintly through the station's halls. "Adaptable, sure, but stubborn, creative, and utterly ridiculous, that's you, human, don't ever change." She paused, eyes glinting with amusement and something warmer, something unspoken. "The universe doesn't scare you enough yet to quit, so that's a bonus." Elias looked at her, realizing that in the madness, in the impossible choreography of survival, he had begun to feel a connection that went beyond admiration or respect. It was subtle, measured in shared jokes, glances, and moments of absurd danger. Liara's presence had become a rhythm, a strange certainty in a galaxy of uncertainty. As he finally allowed himself to rest, ears still ringing from the drone's electric whine, he realized that survival might be less about strategy charts and energy fields, and more about laughing at the improbable, dancing through the dangerous, and trusting the one alien who seemed entirely capable of keeping him alive, and simultaneously driving him mad. And as the crystalline stars shimmered like scattered diamonds in the void, he couldn't help but think that, perhaps, in a universe on the brink of collapse, having someone to laugh with might just be the most vital weapon of all. The anomaly had grown. It wasn't merely a storm, a ripple in space, or a local disturbance. It had become something vast, a twisting, shimmering entity that folded galaxies like origami and hummed with a sound that made the metal of their ship resonate in painful harmonics. Elias stared at it from the cockpit, hands gripping the console as if sheer force could hold the universe together. Liara, seated opposite him, ears twitching in irritation or amusement, he couldn't tell which, leaned back casually, her violet eyes gleaming. "Don't stare too long, human, it gets smug when you panic." "I'm not panicking," he said, though the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "Sure, sure," she replied, her hands already glowing with an intricate weave of energy manipulation. "Just remember, panicking is optional, dead is not." Her smirk suggested she genuinely believed her own joke, and Elias wondered if she ever got tired of being terrifyingly competent. They entered the edge of the anomaly's influence and the ship shuddered violently, knocking Elias off his seat. He landed awkwardly, hitting his shoulder, and Liara quipped, graceful as ever, "At least your fashion sense is intact." Elias groaned, trying to suppress a laugh despite the situation. He had spent months training, surviving strange planets, plasma storms, and her relentless teasing, and yet this still felt impossible. The anomaly pulsed. It wasn't intelligent, at least not in any sense they could reason with, but it reacted, flexing like a cosmic predator. Liara's ears flicked toward it, catching distortions in the energy field that human sensors couldn't detect. She raised her hands, forming arcs of glowing violet energy that intertwined with the ship's own shields. "We're going to have to think like it. Predictive chaos," she said, voice calm, teasing even. "Try to imagine what it wants, then do the opposite, preferably with flair." Elias frowned, trying to picture the desires of a universe-consuming entity. "I don't even know what desires means in this context." "Precisely," she said, rolling her eyes though a faint grin tugged at her lips. "That's why you're lucky I'm here." Her energy pulses flared, interacting with the anomaly's shifting tendrils. It recoiled slightly, like a cat surprised by its own reflection. Elias realized, half amused, half awed, that she treated it the way a chess master might play against someone who could only knock pieces over. They weaved through the folds of warped space, dodging folds of collapsing stars and streams of energy that might have been fatal if not for Liara's guidance. Every misstep came with a quip or a sarcastic observation. "I'd suggest caution, but you just call it dramatic flair," she said as Elias narrowly avoided an exploding comet. He laughed, shouting over the roar of their engines, "Dramatic flair has kept us alive so far." Their synchronized approach began to pay off. Elias improvised sequences the way only a stubborn human could, leveraging Liara's energy manipulation and his own unpredictability to destabilize the anomaly's pulsing core. One particularly wild maneuver involved Elias throwing himself across a console to trigger an emergency grav shift, while Liara directed a cascade of violet energy in precise arcs. The anomaly recoiled again, and Elias caught his breath, realizing he had actually begun to enjoy this madness. Hours, or maybe seconds, time felt distorted past in a blur of motion and light. They pushed the anomaly back, containment fields snapping into place, energy conduits humming with Liara's command and Elias' improvisation. At one point, a tendril of the anomaly reached toward them, and Elias instinctively swatted it away with a joking, "Shoo, you oversized space worm." Liara laughed despite the danger, then redirected an energy pulse to seal the breach. The final surge of power required everything they had learned, every joke, every coordinated move, every instinct honed during their journey. Elias realized he wasn't panicking anymore. He wasn't just reacting, he was anticipating, predicting the chaos with Liara as a rhythm he could follow. He had changed. The chaos no longer intimidated him, it exhilarated him. He had learned that humor could be as powerful as courage, that improvisation could save lives, and that trust, complete, unflinching trust, could conquer even a universe-ending threat. With a final pulse of combined energy, Liara and Elias sealed the anomaly, locking it into a containment field that shimmered with both violet and human-engineered energy patterns. The universe seemed to sigh, the stars flickering back into familiar constellations, planets stabilizing, and the void settling into its natural hum. Elias slumped back in the cockpit, exhausted, exhilarated, and grinning. Liara floated next to him, ears twitching in contentment, and said, "Well, human, we did it. Universe saved, chaos managed, and no one died spectacularly." "I almost did," Elias muttered, rubbing his shoulder, "but thanks for catching me before I became space dust." "You make me sound heroic," she said, amusement dancing in her eyes. I'll allow it, just don't get used to it.